Hey everyone, before we dive into one of the most forbidden and powerful ancient texts ever written, I want to know, what time is it where you're watching from, and where in the world are you right now? I'm asking because what I'm about to share with you transcends time and space, but I want to know when this knowledge finds you, because the moment you clicked on this video, your spiritual journey just took a turn that can never be reversed. And trust me, by the end of this, you're going to understand why the timing of you finding this information is not a coincidence. So drop your location and time in the comments. Let's see how this ancient wisdom is spreading across the globe right now, awakening souls in every time zone, because what we're about to explore together has been hidden, suppressed, and kept away from humanity for nearly 2,000 years. And there's a reason why the powers that be didn't want you to know what's written in these sacred texts. You've probably heard whispers about ancient mystery schools, secret societies, and forbidden knowledge that could unlock the true nature of reality, right? Maybe you've seen symbols, heard phrases like, as above, so below, or stumbled across references to Hermes Trismegistus in your spiritual research. But what if I told you that buried within a collection of ancient texts called the Corpus Hermeticum lies the exact blueprint for understanding who you really are, where you came from, and the divine power that's been sleeping inside you this entire time? What if everything you've been taught about yourself, about God, about the universe, about your limitations as a human being, was a carefully constructed lie designed to keep you trapped in ignorance, cut off from your true spiritual heritage? The Corpus Hermeticum isn't just some dusty old manuscript sitting in a library somewhere. No, no, no. This is the master key that unlocks everything, and once you understand what's written in these sacred pages, you'll never see yourself, your life, or this reality the same way again. They tried to bury this knowledge. They tried to keep it locked away in mystery schools and secret societies. They tried to make sure that only the chosen few would ever have access to these truths. But guess what? The veil is lifting, the secrets are spilling out, and you are here right now because your soul remembers, your higher self knows, and the universe is calling you back home to the truth of your divine nature. So buckle up, because what I'm about to reveal to you will shatter every illusion you've been living under, and by the time we're done here, you're going to understand why the ancient masters said that once you receive this gnosis, this sacred knowledge, you become something more than human. You become a walking god on earth. Let me take you back, way back, to ancient Alexandria in Egypt, somewhere between the 1st and 3rd centuries of the Common Era, a time when the old world was colliding with the new, when Greek philosophy was merging with Egyptian mysticism, when the ancient mystery schools were still operating in the shadows, passing down secrets that had survived from civilizations far older than most people can even imagine. In this crucible of spiritual and intellectual ferment, a series of texts began to circulate, texts attributed to a mysterious figure called Hermes Trismegistus, which means Hermes the Thrice-Great, and right there in that name you should already be getting chills, because this wasn't just any teacher, this was someone who had mastered the 3 realms of wisdom, the physical, the mental, and the spiritual, someone who had achieved what every spiritual seeker dreams of achieving, complete and total gnosis, direct knowledge of the divine. Now, here's where it gets interesting, because Hermes Trismegistus wasn't just a Greek god or just an Egyptian deity. He was a fusion, a syncretic merging of the Greek god Hermes and the Egyptian god Thoth, and if you know anything about these beings, you know that both of them were the gods of wisdom, of writing, of magic, of the secret arts. Thoth was the scribe of the gods, the keeper of divine knowledge, the one who taught humanity writing, mathematics, astronomy, and the sacred mysteries. Hermes was the messenger between worlds, the psychopomp who guided souls between life and death, the trickster who revealed hidden truths. So when you combine these two archetypal forces into one being, what you get is the ultimate spiritual teacher, the revealer of the deepest mysteries, and that's exactly who the ancients believed was speaking through these texts. But here's the real secret that most people miss. Hermes Trismegistus might not have been a single historical person at all. He might have been a title, a designation given to initiates who reached the highest levels of spiritual attainment in the ancient mystery schools, which means that what's written in the Corpus Hermeticum isn't the teaching of one man. It's the distilled wisdom of an entire lineage of enlightened masters who had cracked the code of reality and were passing it down to those who had eyes to see and ears to hear. So what exactly is the Corpus Hermeticum? Well, it's a collection of writings, usually counted as 17 or 18 separate treatises or books, though the exact number varies depending on which version you're looking at, and these texts are written in the form of dialogues, conversations between Hermes Trismegistus and his students, primarily a student named Asclepius and another called Tat, who was sometimes referred to as Hermes' son, though whether that's literal or symbolic is open to interpretation. The most famous of these texts, the one that opens the entire collection, is called the Poimaendiarius, which translates to the Shepherd of Men or the Divine Pomander, and this text alone contains some of the most profound spiritual teachings ever committed to writing. I mean, we're talking about a complete cosmology, a detailed description of how the universe came into being, how humanity fell from divine grace into material existence, and most importantly, how we can return to our divine source through spiritual awakening and gnosis. When you read the Poimandres, you're not just reading a story or a philosophy, you're being initiated into a mystery, you're being given a transmission of spiritual energy that has the power to activate dormant aspects of your consciousness, and the ancient masters knew this, which is why these texts were guarded so carefully, why they were only shared with initiates who had proven themselves ready through years of preparation, purification, and spiritual practice. Let me break down for you what happens in the Poimandres, because this is where everything begins. This is where the foundation of all Hermetic wisdom is laid. The text opens with Hermes in a state of deep contemplation, his mind freed from bodily concerns, when suddenly a vast being appears before him, a being of light, overwhelming in its radiance and power, and this being identifies itself as Poimandres, the mind of the Absolute, the divine intelligence that underlies all of creation. Now right away, you need to understand what's happening here. This isn't some external god appearing to a worshipper, this is Hermes' own higher consciousness, his divine mind, revealing itself to him, which is the first major teaching of the Corpus Hermeticum. The divine is not separate from you, the divine is not out there, somewhere in the sky, the divine is the deepest aspect of your own being, and the journey of spiritual awakening is about peeling away the layers of illusion and ignorance until you come face to face with this inner divinity. Poimandres then begins to teach Hermes about the nature of reality, and what he reveals is absolutely mind-blowing, even by today's standards. He shows Hermes a vision of creation, how in the beginning there was only the one, the infinite, eternal, unbounded source of all that is, and this one was both darkness and light, emptiness and fullness, a paradoxical unity that contained all potentials within itself. From this one emerged the divine mind, the nous, which contained the archetypal patterns of all things, the sacred geometries and divine ideas that would become the template for the manifest universe. The nous then spoke the word, the logos, the creative vibration that brings form into being, and through this word, the universe began to unfold in a cascade of emanations, each level of reality flowing from the one above it like a waterfall of consciousness descending from pure spirit into denser and denser forms of matter. But here's where it gets really interesting, because Poimandres doesn't just describe the creation of the universe, he describes the creation of humanity, and this is where you start to understand why this knowledge was kept hidden for so long. According to the Hermetic teaching, humanity was not created as the Bible tells it. We were not formed from dust as servants of a jealous God, and we were created as divine beings, as direct emanations of the divine mind itself, made in the exact image and likeness of the Creator, containing within ourselves the same creative power, the same divine intelligence, the same spark of the Absolute that brought the entire universe into existence. Think about that for a moment. You are not some lowly sinner, some fallen creature begging for salvation from an external deity. You are a fragment of God experiencing itself through the lens of individuality. You are the universe becoming conscious of itself. You are divinity playing at being human, temporarily forgetting your true nature so that you can have the adventure of remembering who you really are. This is the secret that every authentic spiritual tradition throughout history has been pointing toward. This is what the mystics mean when they say, "Thou art that." This is what Jesus meant when he said, "The kingdom of heaven is within you." This is what the Buddhists are pointing to when they talk about your Buddha nature, and this is what the Corpus Hermeticum states explicitly, in clear, unmistakable terms: you are divine. You have always been divine, and nothing you have ever done or could ever do could change that fundamental fact of your being. But if we're divine, if we're these exalted spiritual beings created in the image of God Himself, then why are we here, trapped in physical bodies, struggling with pain and suffering and limitation, feeling so cut off from our spiritual source? This is the next crucial teaching in the Poimandres, the explanation of what the Hermetic tradition calls the fall. And it's very different from the Christian story of Adam and Eve eating forbidden fruit. According to Hermes Trismegistus, what happened is this: when primordial humanity was first created as a divine, androgynous being of pure light and consciousness, this being looked down from the spiritual realms and saw the material universe below, the physical cosmos that had been created by the demiurge, the craftsman God who shapes matter according to the patterns held in the divine mind. And humanity, in its innocent curiosity, was attracted to this material realm, fascinated by the beauty of physical forms, enchanted by the play of light and shadow in the world of matter. So humanity descended, not as a punishment, not because of sin or disobedience, but through its own free choice, through its desire to experience what it would be like to inhabit a physical form, to know itself through the limitations and challenges of material existence. And as humanity descended through the spheres of the planets, Saturn, Jupiter, Mars, the Sun, Venus, Mercury, the Moon, each planetary sphere imparted to humanity one of its qualities, one of its limitations, and by the time humanity finally entered into physical incarnation on Earth, we had taken on all the characteristics that we now think of as human nature: ambition from Saturn, expansiveness from Jupiter, aggression from Mars, pride from the Sun, desire from Venus, cunning from Mercury, and changeability from the Moon. We had clothed ourselves in layers upon layers of conditioning, forgetting more and more of our divine origin with each descent, until finally we found ourselves here, in physical bodies, believing ourselves to be nothing more than flesh and blood, completely amnesiac to our true spiritual nature. Now this is where the Corpus Hermeticum gets absolutely revolutionary, because it doesn't leave you stuck in this fallen state. It doesn't say, "Too bad, you're trapped in matter forever, better just accept your fate." No, The entire purpose of these teachings is to show you the way back, to give you the map for the return journey, to activate within you the memory of your divine origin so that you can begin the process of spiritual ascent, climbing back up through those same planetary spheres, shedding the limitations you took on during the descent, reclaiming your divine powers, and ultimately reuniting with the divine source from which you came. This process, this journey of return, is what the Hermeticists call gnosis, which is a Greek word that means knowledge, but not intellectual knowledge, not book learning, not something you can get from reading or studying. Gnosis is direct, experiential, transformative knowledge of the divine. It's the moment when your soul remembers its true nature, when the veils of illusion drop away, and you see with spiritual vision the reality that underlies all of material existence. And the Corpus Hermeticum is crystal clear about this. Gnosis is available to everyone. It's not reserved for special prophets or chosen ones. It's your birthright as a divine being, and the path to achieving it is laid out in these sacred texts with remarkable clarity and precision. So what are the actual practices, the actual teachings that lead to this gnosis? Let me walk you through some of the key principles that run throughout the entire Corpus Hermeticum, the fundamental laws of reality that, once understood and applied, have the power to completely transform your consciousness and your life. The first and most famous of these principles is what's known as the principle of correspondence, immortalized in the phrase, as above, so below, as below, so above, which comes from the Emerald Tablet, another Hermetic text closely associated with the Corpus Hermeticum. This principle teaches that there's a correspondence between all levels of reality, that the macrocosm, the great universe, is reflected in the microcosm, the individual human being, and that by understanding one, you can understand the other. What does this mean practically? It means that you contain within yourself a complete replica of the entire universe, that every force, every energy, every principle that operates in the cosmos also operates within your own being, and that by going inward, by exploring the depths of your own consciousness, you can come to understand the deepest mysteries of creation itself. This is why all authentic spiritual paths emphasize self-knowledge, why the ancient Greek maxim, "Know thyself," was inscribed at the Temple of Delphi, why mystics throughout history have taught that the journey to God begins with the journey into your own soul. Because you are the universe in miniature, you are the hologram that contains the whole, and the deepest truths of existence are not hidden in some distant heaven or ancient text. They're hidden within the very structure of your own consciousness. The second major principle taught in the Corpus Hermeticum is the principle of mentalism, the understanding that all is mind, that the universe itself is a mental creation, a thought in the divine mind, and that material reality is a kind of solidified or crystallized consciousness. Now, before you dismiss this as some kind of New Age fluff, understand that this teaching is pointing towards something that modern quantum physics is only now beginning to confirm. That consciousness is not an epiphenomenon of matter, not some accidental byproduct of brain chemistry, but is actually the primary reality, the ground of all being, and that matter is what emerges when and where consciousness focuses its attention. The Corpus Hermeticum teaches that your mind is creative, that your thoughts, beliefs, and mental states are not passive reflections of external reality but are actively shaping your experience of reality, and that by learning to master your mind, by purifying your thoughts and aligning your consciousness with divine truth, you can literally transform your life and the world around you. This is not positive thinking or manifestation in the superficial way those terms are often used today. This is a profound recognition that consciousness is the brush and reality is the canvas, and that as you awaken to your divine nature, as you reclaim your identity as a spark of the divine mind, you begin to exercise the same creative power that brought the universe itself into existence. The third principle, closely related to the first two, is the principle of vibration, the teaching that nothing is stationary, that everything in the universe is in constant motion, vibrating at different frequencies, and that the difference between spirit and matter is simply a difference in the rate of vibration. The densest, slowest vibrations appear to us as solid matter, while the highest, fastest vibrations are pure spirit, pure consciousness, pure divine light. And here's the key insight that the Corpus Hermeticum wants you to understand. You are not fixed at any particular vibration. You are not locked into the dense, slow frequency of ordinary human consciousness. You have the ability to raise your vibration, to accelerate the frequency of your consciousness until you're vibrating in harmony with the divine, until you're resonating at the same frequency as the enlightened masters, the angels, the gods, the highest beings in the spiritual hierarchy. And how do you raise your vibration? Through the practices that every spiritual tradition teaches: meditation, contemplation, prayer, sacred study, virtuous living, purification of your thoughts and emotions, cultivation of love and compassion, service to others, and above all, the persistent turning of your attention toward the divine, the constant remembering of your true spiritual nature even while living in a physical body. Now, the Corpus Hermeticum doesn't just give you abstract principles and leave you to figure out the rest on your own. No, these texts contain detailed teachings about the structure of reality, the nature of the soul, the process of spiritual transformation, and I want to share with you some of the most powerful and practical wisdom from these sacred writings. In several of the treatises, Hermes discusses the concept of the nous, the divine mind, and explains that every human being has access to this mind, but most people never activate it because they're completely identified with their lower faculties: their body, their emotions, their egoic thoughts. The nous is described as a faculty above ordinary thinking, a direct intuitive knowing that comes when you quiet the chattering mind and allow divine intelligence to flow through you. The Corpus Hermeticum teaches a practice of stilling the senses, withdrawing attention from the external world, and creating an inner silence, an inner emptiness, into which the nous can descend and illuminate your consciousness with divine truth. This is essentially a form of meditation, and it's remarkable how similar the Hermetic instructions are to meditation practices found in Eastern traditions like Buddhism and Vedanta, even though these teachings developed in completely different cultural contexts, which suggests that they're all pointing toward the same underlying spiritual reality, the same truth about consciousness that transcends culture and time. Another powerful teaching in the Corpus Hermeticum concerns the nature of good and evil, and this is where Hermetic philosophy gets really radical and might challenge some of your existing belief. According to Hermes Trismegistus, true evil doesn't actually exist in the absolute sense. What we call evil is simply ignorance. It's the absence of good, just as darkness is the absence of light. And just as you don't fight darkness by attacking it but simply by bringing in light, you don't overcome evil by fighting against it but by bringing in the light of gnosis, the illumination of divine knowledge. The Corpus Hermeticum teaches that all suffering, all sin, all wrongdoing comes from one source: ignorance of our divine nature, forgetting who we really are, and when a human being awakens to gnosis, when they remember their identity as a divine being, they naturally and effortlessly align with goodness, with truth, with love, because those qualities are the nature of the divine that they've recognized within themselves. This means that spiritual transformation is not about becoming something you're not, it's about remembering and revealing what you've always been but had forgotten. It's about peeling away the false identities, the limiting beliefs, the cultural conditioning, until the divine core of your being shines forth in all its glory. The Corpus Hermeticum also contains profound teachings about death and what happens after we leave the physical body, and this is information that can radically change your relationship with mortality if you really understand it. According to the Hermetic texts, death is not an ending but a transition, a shedding of the physical vehicle and a return to the spiritual realms from which we came. But here's the crucial point: where you go after death, what kind of afterlife experience you have, depends entirely on the level of consciousness you've achieved during your physical incarnation. If you've lived your entire life identified with your body, your ego, your material possessions and achievements, if you've never done any spiritual work or self-inquiry, then at death you will be confused and disoriented, pulled by your attachments and desires into realms that match your vibrational state, and you may end up reincarnating quickly back into physical form because you haven't resolved your karmic patterns or achieved liberation. But if you've done the work, if you've practiced gnosis, if you've purified your consciousness and awakened to your divine nature, then at death you consciously release the physical body, you deliberately ascend through the planetary spheres, and instead of being trapped by the gravitational pull of each sphere, you shed the limitation associated with that sphere, you reclaim your divine power at each level, until finally you break free from the wheel of reincarnation entirely and merge back into the divine source as a fully conscious, fully awakened being. This is what the Hermeticists called regeneration or rebirth, and it's the ultimate goal of the spiritual path. Not to go to some heavenly realm where you can rest in blissful ignorance for eternity, but to achieve complete liberation, to become one with the divine while retaining your individual consciousness, to become what some traditions call a master or an adept or an ascended being. One of the most beautiful and mystical sections of the Corpus Hermeticum is found in a treatise called The Secret Sermon on the Mountain, which is a dialogue between Hermes and his son Tat, and in this text, Hermes describes the process of spiritual regeneration, of being born again in the spiritual sense, and the language he uses is absolutely poetic and powerful. He talks about how the old self must die, how the body of illusion must be dissolved, how the false identities and limiting beliefs must be stripped away one by one, and how in their place, new divine qualities are born within the soul, the 12 divine powers that include knowledge, joy, self-control, endurance, righteousness, generosity, truth, the good, life, and light. As each of these divine qualities awakens within you, the corresponding vices and limitations are expelled, ignorance is driven out by knowledge, sorrow by joy, intemperance by self-control, until eventually your entire being has been transformed, regenerated, made new, and you stand as a fully awakened human being, a walking embodiment of divine consciousness on earth. And Hermes makes it clear that this regeneration is not something that happens automatically at death. It's not a gift bestowed by an external savior, it's something that you must choose, something you must work for, something you must practice through dedicated spiritual effort during your physical lifetime. Now let's talk about one of the most practical and immediately applicable teachings in the entire Corpus Hermeticum, which is the understanding of the 7 Hermetic principles, sometimes called the 7 laws of the universe, which some Hermetic scholars believe are encoded throughout the various treatises of the corpus even if they're not explicitly listed as such. We've already discussed 3 of them: correspondence, mentalism, and vibration, but let me briefly touch on the other 4 because these are tools you can use right now to transform your life and accelerate your spiritual evolution. The 4th principle is the principle of polarity, which teaches that everything has 2 poles, 2 opposites, but these opposites are actually the same thing at different degrees. Hot and cold are both temperature, just at different points on the spectrum. Love and hate are both emotional energy, just flowing in different directions. Understanding this principle allows you to transmute negative states into positive ones, to shift from fear to courage, from anger to peace, from despair to hope, not by suppressing the negative but by recognizing that it's the same energy as the positive and then consciously shifting it along the spectrum to the desired pole. The fifth principle is rhythm, the understanding that everything flows in cycles, that there's an ebb and flow to all of life, pendulum swings back and forth, tides go in and out, and that trying to resist these natural rhythms causes suffering while flowing with them brings ease and grace. The sixth principle is cause and effect, sometimes called karma in Eastern traditions, the teaching that every action has consequences, that you reap what you sow, not as punishment from an external judge but as the natural operation of universal law, and that by understanding this principle, you can take responsibility for your life instead of seeing yourself as a victim of random circumstances. And the seventh principle is gender, which has nothing to do with biological sex but refers to the masculine and feminine principles that exist in all things. The masculine being active, projective, assertive, the feminine being receptive, nurturing, creative, and that spiritual wholeness comes from balancing these two aspects within yourself, integrating both the masculine and feminine poles into a unified consciousness. Here's something absolutely fascinating that most people don't know about the Corpus Hermeticum. These texts had an enormous influence on the development of Western civilization, particularly during the Renaissance, even though they were lost to Europe for over 1,000 years during the Middle Ages. In 1460, a Greek monk brought a manuscript of the Corpus Hermeticum to Florence, Italy, and Cosimo de' Medici, one of the most powerful men in Europe, was so excited about it that he ordered his chief translator, Marsilio Ficino, to stop his translation of Plato's complete works, which he'd been working on for years, and translate the Hermetic texts first because Cosimo believed they contained older and more important wisdom than even Plato. And when these texts were finally translated into Latin and began circulating among European intellectuals, they sparked a revolution in thinking. They helped fuel the entire Renaissance, the rebirth of art, science, philosophy, and spirituality that transformed Western culture. Suddenly, scholars and mystics had access to a completely different paradigm than the dogmatic Christianity that had dominated Europe for centuries. They had a vision of humanity as divine, of the universe as an interconnected whole, of knowledge as something to be sought through direct experience rather than just accepted on authority. And this explosion of Hermetic ideas influenced everyone from Leonardo da Vinci to Giordano Bruno to Isaac Newton, who was secretly an alchemist and spent more time studying Hermetic texts than he did on the physics that made him famous. But here's where the story gets dark, because the same religious authorities who had kept humanity in ignorance for so long were not happy about these empowering Hermetic teachings spreading through the population. In 1614, a scholar named Isaac Casaubon used linguistic analysis to argue that the Corpus Hermeticum couldn't have been written by an ancient Egyptian sage, that it was actually composed in the early centuries of the Common Era, and while his analysis was technically correct about the dating, the implication was that these texts were therefore fake or fraudulent and should be dismissed and ignored. And just like that, the Hermetic revival was shut down. These sacred teachings were pushed back into obscurity, relegated to the fringes where only occultists and esotericists continued to study them. But here's what the critics miss. It doesn't matter whether Hermes Trismegistus was a single historical person or when exactly these texts were written. What matters is whether the teachings are true, whether they work, whether they have the power to transform consciousness and lead seekers to genuine spiritual awakening, and the answer to that is a resounding yes, as evidenced by the countless mystics, magicians, alchemists, and spiritual practitioners throughout history who have used Hermetic principles to achieve extraordinary states of consciousness and understanding. The Corpus Hermeticum also contains teachings about the nature of God that are remarkably sophisticated and that bridge the gap between the personal God of religion and the impersonal absolute of philosophy. Hermes describes the divine as simultaneously transcendent and immanent, as beyond all qualities and concepts yet present in all things, as the one that contains the many, as the eternal unchanging reality that somehow gives rise to the ever-changing universe of manifestation. God is described as the good, the beautiful, the true, as pure light and life, as the mind that thinks the universe into existence, and most importantly, as knowable, as something you can experience directly in the depths of your own consciousness through gnosis. Unlike religions that emphasize the vast gulf between humanity and divinity, the Corpus Hermeticum teaches that you can know God because you are God in essence. You're a ray of the divine sun, a wave of the infinite ocean, a thought in the divine mind, and the spiritual journey is simply the process of recognizing this truth that's been true all along. Let me share with you one of the most powerful practices described in the Corpus Hermeticum, a meditation technique that can give you a direct taste of gnosis if you practice it sincerely. The text instructs you to find a quiet place where you won't be disturbed, to sit comfortably and close your eyes, and then to begin withdrawing your attention from your physical senses one by one. First, become aware of your sense of touch, all the places where your body makes contact with the world, and then gently release your identification with these sensations. Let them fade into the background. Then do the same with taste, with smell, with sound, with sight. Even though your eyes are already closed, release the mental images, the internal visualizations. Let the inner screen go dark. Then move deeper and withdraw from your emotions, all the feelings and moods that normally color your experience. Let them settle and become still, and then deeper still. Withdraw from your thoughts, the constant chattering of the mental voice, the stream of words and concepts and memories and plans. Let it all slow down and eventually stop. And what you're left with, in that profound silence, is pure awareness, consciousness itself without any content, and this, according to Hermes, is the threshold of gnosis. This is where the divine mind can reveal itself to you. This is where you touch the eternal aspect of your being that transcends the personality and the ego and connects directly to the source. The Corpus Hermeticum also addresses a question that troubles many spiritual seekers. If we're divine, if we're supposed to be ascending back to spiritual realms, then why are we here in physical bodies? What's the point of material existence? And the answer given in these texts is beautiful and profound. The universe is not a mistake. Matter is not evil or inferior to spirit. The physical world is actually a sacred creation, a manifestation of divine beauty and intelligence, and our purpose in being here is to be conscious participants in the ongoing creation, to bring divine qualities like love, wisdom, beauty, and justice into material reality, to be bridges between heaven and earth, spirit and matter, the transcendent and the immanent. You're not supposed to escape the world, you're supposed to transform it, to be an agent of divine will in physical form, and paradoxically, it's only by fully embodying your spiritual realization, by bringing it down into your everyday life and relationships and actions, that you complete the circuit and achieve true liberation. So what does all of this mean for you right now in your daily life? How do you take these ancient Hermetic teachings and actually apply them in a practical way that makes a difference? First, you need to accept and internalize the fundamental truth that you are divine, not as an ego-inflating belief or a New Age platitude, but as a deep, bone-level knowing that completely reorients your identity and your relationship to reality. Second, you need to begin the work of purification, which means honestly examining all the false beliefs, limiting patterns, unhealed traumas, and ego structures that are blocking your divine nature from shining through, and systematically dissolving them through whatever practices resonate with you: therapy, meditation, shadow work, breath work, plant medicine, whatever works. Third, you need to cultivate gnosis through regular spiritual practice, creating space in your life for stillness, for silence, for connection with your higher self and with the divine mind that pervades all things. Fourth, you need to study these teachings deeply, not just the Corpus Hermeticum but the entire Western esoteric tradition as well as the wisdom traditions from other cultures, because the more you understand the map of consciousness, the more skillfully you can navigate your own awakening. Fifth, you need to apply the Hermetic principles in your daily life, using the law of correspondence to understand your inner world by observing the outer world and vice versa, using the law of vibration to consciously raise your frequency, using the law of polarity to transmute negative states into positive ones, using all these tools to become a master of your own consciousness rather than a puppet controlled by unconscious forces. And sixth, you need to find or create community with others who are on the same path. Because while the journey to gnosis is ultimately solitary, having companions, teachers, and fellow seekers makes the path so much easier and helps you avoid the traps and pitfalls that have snared countless seekers before you. The Corpus Hermeticum ends with a powerful call to action, an exhortation from Hermes to his students to go out and share this sacred knowledge with others who are ready to receive it, to become teachers and transmitters of the divine wisdom, to help awaken humanity from its slumber of ignorance. And that's exactly what I'm doing here with you today. I'm passing on teachings that have been passed down through chain after chain of initiates for over 2,000 years, knowledge that has transformed countless lives, that has the power to completely revolutionize your understanding of yourself and reality if you let it. But here's the key. This can't just be intellectual knowledge, it can't just be interesting ideas that you collect like spiritual trinkets, it has to become lived wisdom, it has to be tested and verified in the laboratory of your own consciousness, it has to transform you from the inside out until you're no longer the person you were before you encountered these teachings. Before we close, I want to address something important. The Corpus Hermeticum is not the only source of spiritual truth, it's one thread in a vast tapestry of wisdom teachings that have emerged throughout human history, from every culture and tradition. What makes the Hermetic texts special is their clarity, their systematic presentation of universal spiritual principles, their practical applicability, and their emphasis on direct experience rather than blind faith. But the same truths are taught in the Upanishads, in Buddhist sutras, in Sufi poetry, in Kabbalistic texts, in the writings of Christians, so there you have it. The sacred secrets of the Corpus Hermeticum, the forbidden wisdom that's been hidden in plain sight for nearly 2,000 years, waiting for souls like you to rediscover it. You now know what the ancient masters knew, that you're not just a human having a spiritual experience, you're a divine being having a human experience, and the power to transform your entire reality lies dormant within you, waiting to be awakened. The question is, what are you going to do with this knowledge? Are you going to let it be just another interesting video you watched? Or are you going to let it be the catalyst for your complete spiritual transformation? The choice is yours, it's always been yours, and the universe is watching, waiting to see if you'll finally remember who you really are. If this resonated with you, drop a comment below sharing your biggest takeaway. Hit that subscribe button if you want more forbidden knowledge like this, and remember, the journey of 1,000 miles begins with a single step, and you just took yours. As above, so below. As within, so without. Now go forth and awaken. I'll see you in the next one.